everyone and welcome to part 2 of my synergy video series. In the first part, we discussed what is synergy and how choosing good set of commanders could be beneficial whereas choosing wrong ones could be disastrous. Now before we start with the part 2, I would like to coin some skills or some terms which are going to be discussed often in the coming videos. Now these terms, if we talk about them, these are nothing but the special skills or attributes of some commanders who play a very major role in all the three different types of synergies. So as and when they are discussed in the coming videos, we will focus more on them. I will try to explain all these terms as and when required. So for now, in this video, we are going to focus on the female setup or the female synergy. So without wasting any time, let's get started. So the main commander for the female synergy is Leila Mormont. In order to have that female setup completed or to even begin with, you need to have Leila Mormont at 4-star awakened. If you do not have her at 4-star, then the female synergy would not work. You would be able to use her as a good total attack commander, but her 4-star awakening skill is what enables us to use the female synergy. So on that note, let's see what her awakening skill says. So Leila Mormont's awakening skill is called Mama Bear's Frenzy, and it states that when your female commanders use their active skills, that skill will have a 30% chance of being used 2 times, a 10% chance of being used 3 times, and a 3% chance of being used 4 times. So what it basically means is, the more you play female commanders with Leila Mormont, the better it is. Every time your female commanders are using their active skills, those skills have a very good probability of being repeated, and that means having additional damage to the enemy lineup. And also at the same time, it's amazing that I believe it is one of the easiest synergy to play because we have many options for this setup. So let's have a look at some of them. So the very first commander which I would like to discuss is Salma. Now she is one of the best female commanders to be played in this synergy, and she allows your female commanders to use their active skills in the very first second when the battle begins. That's her awakening skill, and usually the awakening skills strike in at after 10 seconds, but if you have Salma in your lineup, that means you can directly use your awakening skills once before the battle begins, and that really gives you a kickstart. Also, we have Arya in this setup. Now Arya is a total attack commander and she is also free to play. So having her in the setup is pretty amazing because her active army skill and awakening skills are also connected. So every time she is performing an active army skill, her awakening skill is also getting triggered. And similarly for Annie, she is also a total attack commander, and her active skill helps her to trigger awakening skill as well. And through her awakening skill, actually we are actually wiping out some of the enemy troops directly. So we'll look at all these commanders in detail in a bit. But there are some other options as well which we can have in the female synergy. So now if we look at these commanders, now these are the big guns. So the very first commander, Marjorie here, well, she is a very good commander and her awakening is completely anti-male commander, to be honest. Now if we talk about Cersei Lannister or Daenerys Targaryen, both of them have an amazing awakening skill, and they also lead to disarm. So as we can see here, Daenerys Targaryen's awakening skill states that she first of all summons the dragon to launch one attack in the beginning of the battle, and after that she reduces the active army skill cooldown by 3 seconds. And after that, if we see, each use has a 80% chance to put the target under the disarm status for 4 seconds. Now what exactly disarm means? It means that normal attacks will miss their target. So we will discuss in the bleed and crit lineup that how important normal attacks are for that synergy. But because of this skill, because of this attribute, actually Daenerys and Cersei Lannister, they both kind of counter the grid lineup, because that entire lineup is based on the normal attack setup, and by not letting them use their normal attacks or by making them miss their normal attacks, basically Daenerys and Cersei are helping the lineup by actually in a way countering them. So that is another great thing about the disarm or the female setup. Okay, so now let's have a look at some other commanders as well, some prominent commanders of the female lineup. So the very first name which pops to my mind would be Salma, because her awakening skill is pretty amazing. So as we can see here, Salma's awakening skill is called All Out Charge, and it states that at the start of the beginning, allied female commanders have a 80% chance to use their active army skill one time directly. So the thing here is that letting all the female commanders or giving them a chance to use their active army skill in the very first second of the battle, that is pretty huge. Also, let's take a moment and look at the active army skill here. For Salma, active army skill is called Khaleesi's Fury, and for each commander, the active army skill damage and cooldown is same by default. The only difference is that their name keeps changing from commander to commander. She's doing 260% damage right now, and her cooldown for active army skill is 10 seconds. So how do we basically improve the active army skill damage? So the very first way is to improve the commander's quality, and if we want to improve the cooldown period, let's say by default it's 15 seconds. So if you want to bring it down to 10 seconds, so the only way of reducing the cooldown period is through awakening. So if we see here, the cooldown is decreased when we awaken them. So at 2 star we reduce it by 2 seconds, and at 4 star we reduce it by 5 seconds. Now there are other ways as well to improve the active army skill. So one of the way would be using this red dragon skill called Dragon Strong Assault skill. Now as we can see under third point named Strong Assault, if we are using this skill, then our commander's army active skill is increased by 12% at level 9. Another way would be using different castle exteriors which improve our commander's active skill damage. So as we can see here, this castle's exterior called Hall of Honor, now it's helping you with your cavalry commanders. So if we are using your female setup and you also use this castle for once, then Leila Mormont and Salma and Lyanna Waters and all the female commanders, and not just female commanders, even the male cavalry commanders will get the benefit out of it. Similarly, we have castles which improve infantry or spearmen commanders active army skill damage as well. Okay, so now let's come back and have a look at Annie and how her awakening skill is connected to active army skill. As we can see, her active army skill, that's just the same, 260% damage and 10 seconds of cooldown at 4 star. So this is pretty much same for all the commanders. But now when we look at her awakening skill, it says that when casting an active army skill, directly wipes out 3% of the target's currently deployed troops. And the condition is that the value cannot exceed 3% of Annie's currently deployed troops. So what's happening here is that whenever Annie is using her active army skill, she is also triggering her awakening skill and wiping out 3% of the target's currently deployed troops. So in a way, this is like extra merit or extra kills that we are getting for every time Annie is using her awakening skill, or let's say every time when she is using her active army skill. So this in particular makes her a great fit for the female lineup, because every time she will be using her active army skill, every time there is a probability that Leela will help her to use that skill again, and that just means 3% troops being defeated, and again 3% of the remaining troops again being defeated. Okay, so far we discussed about commanders who are amazing or who are good for the female setup. Now let's talk about one of the biggest threats for female setup. So that would be Peter Baelish, and that would be because of his awakening skill, where he can put your commanders into disharmony. So what disharmony means is that there is a 50% chance of attacking any lineup at the front of own troops when using active army skills. So let's say if Peter Baelish is using his awakening skill, that means whenever our commanders are using their active army skill, there is a chance that they will attack their own troops. And as we know that the female setup is entirely based on using active skill, and Leila Mormont is making them use active skill again and again. So this is what makes very vulnerable against Peter Baelish. Let's have a quick look at one of the battle reports and see how female setup works. And as an example here, I have taken a report where the allied troops on the left hand side is using a pure female setup. So as we can see here that in the very first second, Salma has triggered her awakening skill, which has led to other commanders use their active army skill. And since all the commanders are using their active army skills, it is also triggering Leila Mormont's War Soul Awakening skill. Now imagine this at the very first second of the battle, and imagine how much damage it deals to the enemy army, because the battle has just begun, and in the very first second, just because of Salma and Leela's combo, you have dealt so much damage to the enemy troops. So this in particular is a really great combo, I believe. And also one more point I would like to point out here, that in this report we saw that we have used Rhea. The trick here is that Rhea should not be a 4-star commander. So now let's have a look why it's not a very good choice to use Rhea. Rhea's awakening skill states that whenever allied troops land a critical hit, she inflicts bleed on the target. Whenever the allied front row lands a total of 20 normal attacks, the next normal attack will be critical hit. However, Rhea will be silenced for the entire battle. It means that she will be unable to use active army skill. Now in part 1 of the video, I also talked how disastrous it would be to use Leila Mormont and Sinara together. So now let's have a look why actually it would be a disaster. So if we look at Sinara's awakening skill, it states that when allied melee troops use normal attacks, there is a 70% chance of attacking one additional time. However, allied troops are silenced and excited. So just now we saw what silenced means. Now what's the meaning of excited? It means that unable to initiate weakness attacks. Now for female setup, we are not bothered about initiating weakness attacks. That is a part of Jaime Lannister's synergy. So what weakness attacks are, we'll discuss it in that video. But for now, as we can see that Rhea was silencing herself, but Sinara is silencing all the commanders, all the allied commanders. So if let's say we add Sinara at 4-star in the female setup, then after a point of time there would be a situation where all the commanders will not be able to use their active army skill. So eventually Leela will not be able to cast her awakening skill. So that is just completely opposite of what the female synergy or Leila Mormont's lineup is looking for. So that okay guys, so in this video we saw what all commanders are good for female lineup and which commanders we should not be using in the female setup, and also we saw how Peter Baelish could be a threat for the female setup. Meanwhile, I would like to say a point that I believe that out of all the synergies that we have, I personally believe that female setup is the most easygoing synergy because it provides way too many options as commanders to choose from. If you want to play Inf, you have so many infantry female commanders like Andrea and Lads apart from any Arya. If you want to play Spears, we can choose Miranda. If you want to play Cavs, you can have Liana Waters into the setup. Salma is amazing as usual. Also, if you want to play bows, you can have some commanders like Sheila and Melisandre. So because of this factor, I believe that it's a very flexible setup, and also it's not a harm to use male commanders. So I've seen people play female synergy and at the same time they are using commanders like Julian or Enzo or Sedge. So because of these few factors, I believe it is one of the most preferred lineup amongst players, and it's also one of the cheapest lineup out there at the moment. That's it guys, I would like to end this video right here. In the next video we'll talk about another synergy. So see you there. Cheers.